Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hook Turn podcast with my excellent friend Sanviv Ahmed. How are you tonight, Sanviv?
I'm going well. Yeah, I'm going well.
Yeah, so we have some interesting topics to talk about in this episode, and one of them we sort of like hinted at in the previous episode. But there's been again this week quite some news in the automotive industry. One story I think is probably going to be a huge relief to people. The other one is a probably a vehicle where you'll either laugh or vomit or you'll have a strong reaction to. And lastly, I got the opportunity to go to the Melbourne Motor Show, which was on last weekend. So I'll talk a little bit of my reflections around that one. Okay, so let's get started with our first topic this week, which is the Volkswagen ID3 Neo. So we all know that Volkswagen ID is their lineup or their brand for their fully electric models. And the ID3 was actually the first model. So it's like a hatchback, slightly larger than the Golf. And it was known for having, lots of software issues, lots of problems with the interior, especially with the touch-based controls and very sort of poor interior quality as well. Had a facelift in 2023, and it's had a much more substantial facelift this week, which was just revealed, and also a name change. So it's now called the ID3 Neo. Exterior is fairly similar to the old model, but where they've really changed is the interior. So a lot more physical controls, a lot more soft touch materials as well. So, Sanbib, do you think this is, given all of the failings with the previous model, do you think this update is enough to save the car?
Well, I mean, okay, obviously, I don't exactly know how many people didn't buy the ID3 because they're unhappy, original ID3 because they're unhappy with the interior. I mean, I'm sure they lost a number of sales because otherwise they wouldn't have gone out of their way to reintroduce buttons and reintroduce buttons in a pretty big way. Like if you look at their the new steering wheel, it's pretty much got shortcut buttons for absolutely everything.
Mm.
And so it is quite impressive in that sense that your that Volkswagen have gone that yes, you not everything can be on the touchscreen,
Mm.
especially not climate control, because that's always the biggest pet peeve. Okay, infotainment having everything related to the sat nav and the car settings, as in driving. Okay, that's fine because you really, I guess, you can't really cleanly put that into a buttons. But
Mm.
having to mess around with the touchscreen when trying to adjust one of the most basic features in a car, which
Yes.
is climate control, is always incredibly frustrating.
Mm.
So it's very good to see that Volkswagen have tried to make sure that they've realized that, okay, shoving everything into a touchscreen is not the smartest thing. So
Mm.
they've gone back. Obviously, and to be fair, the ID3 got a refresh only a couple of years ago to address some of the original software issues and some of the original
Yes.
problems. So this is now further sort of improving that. Um, and also, the exterior design has been polished quite a bit to look, I guess, more like a traditional Golf. I mean, we know in Australia this will basically never come to Australia. It's simply
Mm.
the market for this isn't there, or at least, sorry, the market for it is there, except the price which Volkswagen is going to charge for it simply would not be competitive against the many options we've got here in Australia, particularly from the Chinese brands. So it really wouldn't be possible. But it is a big car in Europe. They sold about 78,000 ID3s in Europe all last year. So it's going to be something that will be a big car for them in Europe. Not as big as the original Golf or their small SUVs like the T-Roc, but still and even if you're talking about the EVs, I think the ID4 would probably be bigger. But it's still a very, very important car. And also what it signals is that this is like you can say a preview of Volkswagen's future cars. It's not like they're just going to do this for this car. They're going to do it now, these sorts of interiors now for other Volkswagens, where they're like, okay, the current, I mean, even with the, say, the Golf Mark 8.5, like they address, like, it's pretty clear that whatever design decisions that Volkswagen were doing during the late 2010s, early 2020s, they've listened to the criticism and have been like, okay, maybe we went a bit too far in the opposite direction. So now they're like, okay, let's pull back. Let's try and address customer concerns and be like, okay, yes, touchscreens are still, of course, the future. No one's ever going to go back to fully analog controls, and in many cases they make complete sense. But they're like, yes, these key controls are really important to have on buttons. So it's good to see that they've acknowledged
Yeah.
that.
I definitely agree. And we've just for maybe a slightly separate link, but I know we've talked a lot about BMW and Tesla, or BMW in particular, over the last couple of episodes. And BMW, the Neue Klasse, everything is still on the touchscreen. Even the air vents are like Tesla style. The direction is controlled via the touchscreen. So I think the one good thing as well is that Volkswagen, they have kept the touchscreen for CarPlay, Android Auto, so that's good, but they've kept the physical air vents as well as as well as introducing or reintroducing the buttons. So I think one of my tests is always, how easy is it to control the fan speed in any new car? And this has a specific button just to increase the fan speed up and down, because I feel like that's one of the key, when you're controlling the air conditioning, climate control settings, you want to control how strongly the air is blowing at you. So I really like that one of the physical controls. It includes the temperature, includes the fan speed, includes the defrost as well, and includes a knob for the adjusting the volume. So that's really, really good. And the buttons themselves, if you pay a little bit more closer attention, they're all like sort of have that galvanized metal finish as well. So it's like very sort of premium. I've been watching some of the videos from, especially Thomas from Autogefühl, who's probably my favorite car reviewer on YouTube, and they have that nice sort of clicky sound as well. They don't feel cheap at all. So, and this is follows on from Volkswagen. I think their CEO Thomas Schaefer had this view that we want to go back to making real Volkswagens again. So what that means is have that focus on, well-designed cars with premium materials that are still accessible to everyone. And that's per the, name Volkswagen, because it stands for people's car. So I'm very happy with this ID3, and I think especially the interior seems like a step forward in the right direction. And yes, Sanviv, I think to your point, when we have the new Golf come out, the Mark 9, I think this is sort of like a harbinger of what the interior design of that car will look like as well. With the exterior design, I think they've refined it as well. It now has a front light bar, which is cool, more body colored panels, so it's a little bit maybe more of a conservative design, but still really good. I think unfortunately the rear brakes, as far as I can tell, are still drum brakes, which has always been a bit weird with the ID rear wheel drive ID models. But it is what it is. It's fine. Um, Sanviv, as a current T-Roc owner, do you have a problem with Volkswagen's touch controls? And has this design direction motivated you to buy another Volkswagen in the future?
To be fair, the T-Roc, they actually said, is one of the, at least the current gen one, sorry, the
Yes.
one that's still sold is the new one that is already out in Europe and will be out in Australia later this year. It's quite different, but the one that's currently sold is actually much more of a relic of the Volkswagen's interior of the 2010. The facelift version, which I've got, which released in 2022, did a hybrid where they brought over some of the new tech from the new Volkswagens into the T-Roc while still retaining the old tech. So that's why my climate control bar is fully touch operated, but not within the touchscreen. It's still its own separate thing, but it is a touch operated thing. So I haven't got the new style Volkswagen interior that people have been complaining about. So for me, it's never been an issue. The
Okay.
climate controls are completely separate on my car, and the infotainment on my T-Roc is nothing like the very, very new Volkswagen infotainments. Obviously, since you just use CarPlay or Android Auto, it doesn't really matter because most people don't see the true infotainment. But yes, my car is much more reminiscent of the Golf 7.5 sort of days, mixed in with a tiny bit of the new stuff. But broadly speaking, it's much more in line with Volkswagen's old interiors.
Yeah. So it seems like you've skipped all the problems you've kept with the conservative approach. So you made the right decision with when you bought your T-Roc. Cool. Okay. So anything else? I think just other changes that they've made. We'll quickly touch on those. So they've increased the battery capacity and the range as well. So I believe the larger battery now has up to 630 kilometers of range, which is, really, really good. The fast charging has also increased to 183 kilowatts. So that's, not not complete state of the art, but it's still, not atrocious. I think for its class of car, its segment, it's pretty good actually. So yeah, uh, I think overall a very solid update. I'm happy with the direction that Volkswagen is going in. Finally, they've listened to their customers and, they've moved away from this iPad on wheels type philosophy. Okay. Anything else, Sandeep?
No, again, and let's like, it's not just Volkswagen doing this. We're seeing a lot of other brands and their CEO saying, "Yep, we made a
Yeah.
mistake going full touchscreen," and they're sort of, winding back a bit and being like, "Yeah, physical buttons are important." So I reckon there will be like a Back to the Future sort of thing where, in the cars a couple of years down the line, we'll go back to the happy medium. Yes, a lot of stuff will still be touchscreen. Yes, we're still going to have massive screens, but those core functions will often still be kept on the buttons.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. We might move on to our next topic, which is probably, I think it's fair to say this is probably one of, if not the most controversial car that's been released this year.
Or not released. Isn't there still like it's coming out in next year, so it's still got a while to be released. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean they have revealed this is the full production design though, so it's not a concept. We don't know what the interior looks like, but the exterior and we don't know exactly what the battery specifications and the range. We can have a guess, but the exterior design which they've revealed, I would say it's probably the most controversial car released this year, in my opinion, or if not one of, maybe it's one of, but yeah. And it's interesting because it's from what is traditionally quite a conservative brand, but with this one, they've decided to, throw all of that out. So it's the all new Nissan Juke. So the Duke has always been, a little bit avant-garde in its styling. It's, that's kind of what has made it very sort of an icon almost in Nissan's European lineup. They did sell, I think they sold the first generation here, and they sold the second generation in Australia as well, but they discontinued it, I believe, when was it, last year or in 2024. But the new Juke is going to be all electric. It's going to use similar technologies to the Nissan Leaf, which is much more, conservatively styled and much more normal looking to say the least. But I think this design, it looks like somebody's already crashed into the car, or they've got a piece of origami paper and they've scrunched it up and they've sort of like unfolded it but it still has all of the creases. So, Sandeep, are you a fan of this design, or is this something that causes you to throw up?
I was going to say that the one thing I'm already thinking is that you would not want to get into any kind of accident with this car, because
Yeah.
imagine trying to repair something like this.
Yeah.
So even excluding its design, I'm like thinking I cannot imagine what the insurance for a car like this would be, because it's an EV, which is already more expensive to insure, and the body paneling on this will mean that
Yeah.
you have to drive this like so slowly and hope that no one ever hits you. Like, geez, like so yeah, other than that, I mean, look, I kind of get it. As you already pointed out, Duke has always been known for a bit off the wall styling, so it was never going to look like a conventional car.
Yeah.
So I guess to that extent, I mean, fair enough. Like, there's only so many ways you can go. They can't go really those smooth lines. Really
Mm,
aggressive lines have also been done. So I guess if they want to do something different, this is one way to go. It could look okay in the metal. I wouldn't be surprised if
yeah.
in photos it doesn't look that great, but it could look okay in like in real life. So I'm not going to judge it too much for that. And like I said, it's still better than being a super generic. I don't think it looks ugly either, really.
Yeah.
I think you'd need to really appreciate, like, see it in person to fully appreciate.
Mm,
But as I said, I'd be more like concerned about, yeah, getting into an accident with this car and how
yeah. I mean, to
Oh
be
yeah,
honest, it does look like it's already had an accident from the side, in my
yeah,
opinion, with some
yeah,
of
exactly. So yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I do have to give props to Nissan for having the bravery and the boldness to go out there, and I can only imagine like how difficult it will be to actually produce some of the stampings for the body panels because there's so many creases and sharp lines. Like if you just, I mean, it's hard to describe in a podcast. You really have to see images of this to really appreciate, how complex the some of the surfacing is, but from the side, there's body panels, there's creases, and there's lines going from the top to the bottom to the side, like every sort of which way with the direction. I do also think, Sam, to your point about it not being ugly, I think it's a very sort of color sensitive car, so like I feel like it'll maybe look a little bit more dynamic in the bright colors. So they've revealed in terms of the colors that they've revealed this sort of yellowy lime color when it actually looks it's like a two-tone with like a dark black bonnet, and then the rear three quarters is sort of black as well, and it's a black roof. But then the rest of the side panels in the front are yellow. So that's interesting. And then they've also revealed this sort of what purple, would you say purple sandbib or like light blue sort of color? Maybe
yeah. There's
more,
probably a specific name for it, but yes, that
yeah,
lightish purple. Yeah,
lightish purple, like almost like a mauve sort of color. That doesn't look bad either. I think out of the two that they've revealed, I think the lime sort of green or yellow, so citrusy yellow, is probably my favorite. But yeah, this design, like, yeah, props to them for doing it. Like even things like the badge on the tail, like it's not horizontal, it's actually vertical. So which is, you have to sort of rotate your head 90 degrees to read the read what it says, read the Juke badge. So it's yeah, very dynamic. I'm keen to see whether they sort of carry this theme on to the interior, which we haven't seen. So I mean, it'll be interesting if they just sort of lift the interior from the Leaf and just keep it like two screens and very conventional. But I feel, if they want to take this design all the way, they have to include some of these crazy angles on the inside as well. So that's what I'm also equally keen to see. Yeah, I think it's going to be like the closest Japanese rival, and it's not electric, but I think the Toyota CHR is sort of like its closest spiritual rival, like which is CHR is also, and I know that actually there is an electric CHR Plus,
yeah.
but that's more of like a coupe style, sportier looking vehicle. So I think it will be interesting to see a comparison with the CHR hybrid, the CHR Plus electric, and the Juke. I think they're sort of probably its most direct rivals. So yeah, is this something that you would consider buying, Sanviv, or too out there for you?
No, I wouldn't not consider buying it for the design. I would not
Yeah,
consider buying it because obviously it's a small SUV. It's
yeah,
more it's a very European focused SUV,
yes,
especially being electric. The reality is in Australia's roads, you'd want something a bit bigger, probably
yeah,
something with a bit more. I mean, from what I understand, the range won't be too bad,
yeah,
560 kilometers plus. But again, we
yeah,
don't know the final
yeah,
thing. But yeah, that's the reason. The fact that it's British built could be a cool thing as well.
yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, like I said, we'll see how it goes. Pricing will also matter a lot. We've already spoken about the fact that pricing, especially for EVs, are very important now. It especially matters in Australia, in Europe and the UK, where there are a lot more tariffs on Chinese EVs. The
Mm,
Chinese EVs are not as price competitive as they are here.
yes.
But still, they've got competition from other cars like the Renault 4 E-Tech, Kia EV3, etc. So there
Mm,
is competition. Yes, Nissan, I believe, is a bit more popular in Europe,
mm,
generally. So and also this is, from what I understand, a lot more European influenced.
yes.
It's not actually necessarily in there from their Japanese sort of
Yeah.
headquarters. So yeah, but like I said, it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Again, it's not coming out for a very long time. It won't be till next year. So
Mm.
we haven't even really. I don't. Have we seen the interior?
No, no. I don't
Yeah,
think they
so
already
that's
have.
another huge thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. Like, but Nissan's interiors have been okay actually. So
Yeah, the recent interiors have been good, but I mean, I don't think this car will be sold in Australia. Like they've cancelled the new Leaf as well. That was initially when that came out. It's going to be sold here, but now they've sort of taken a step back and said, "No, we're not going to sell it," which is interesting given the current fuel prices and demand for EVs. But anyway, Sandra, did you want to touch on just quickly the two other models that they sort of, well, one they teased and then the other one they sort of revealed as well. So the one that they teased was the new Skyline, which is a sort of more of a, again, I don't know, the Skyline hasn't been, I mean, it's a very popular JDM grey market import in Australia, but hasn't been sold like officially for quite a while. I don't think it's been sold in more than 20 years. In Australia, but they teased a new version of that, which is a going to be like a very sort of sporty sedan. Any thoughts on that one, Sandeep?
I mean, we'll see. The Nissan Z or the Nissan 400Z, whichever one you want to call it,
Yes.
is sold here. Obviously, an extremely niche car,
Yes.
but yeah, we'll see. Like, the problem is even compared to the previous GTR, which was in the six, comfortably in the six, this will be even more expensive. So, like, I don't know. And also, realistically, if they're just teasing it, we're not going to see it till 20, closer to 2030, 2029, 2030. That's reality.
Mm,
So but it is good to see that companies like Nissan are still doing expensive sports cars
yeah.
and they're still in that thing. As far as the Nissan X-Trail, it looks nice.
Yeah.
It almost looks like the Nissan Aria in a way.
Yeah. Same
Again,
sort
they're
of
getting a
design
bit
though.
more thing. The current Nissan X-Trail is already a pretty nice car
Mm.
inside. I can't imagine that this would be any different. So yeah, and we'll again see it next year.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing with the X-Trail is that I believe it's going to be e-power only. So that's a sort of big like sort of leap of faith or confidence in Nissan's hybrid powertrain. So and I think the e-power, like the latest version, is quite fuel efficient. It's very smooth to drive. So yeah, it'll be when it comes to Australia, I think it'll be an interesting sort of rival to the new RAV4 as well. Cool. Okay, look, we might leave it there for Nissan. Now let's move on to the final topic, which is sort of my reflections over some cars that I've driven and events that I've been to over the last couple of weeks. So one of the events that I went to last weekend was the Melbourne Motor Show. So, Melbourne Motor Show, it's not as, it's not as, for those of our listeners who have very long memories, back in the early to mid 2000s, they used to have motor shows almost every year. It was initially they had one in Sydney and in Melbourne, and then they switched from Sydney to Melbourne. So one year Sydney would hold it, the other year Melbourne would hold it. And they used to have almost every brand that was selling a car in Australia used to show up and they'd show their new models, their current showroom. And it used to be a sort of like this huge, incredible event and you could do test drives and so much. And I used to love going to the shows. I remember I went in, I think I went like almost 3 years, 2003, 2004, 2005, when I was really quite little, and it used to be heaven for me. Like so this is not on that scale, unfortunately. They Melbourne Motor Show today, this is its second year running, and a lot of the focus is on Chinese brands. So a lot of the exhibitors are these new sort of Chinese brands. So MG, BYD, GAC, Chery. I think there's GWM. There's a lot of, in terms of the traditional or legacy quote unquote OEMs. You don't have too many and representatives, but you do have I think this year Renault showed up, Honda as well, Kia showed up as well. So I think those were the probably the three biggest sort of legacy OEMs that showed up. So I had the opportunity to drive and sit in a few models, but the two that I was able to test drive was the Renault Scenic and MG IM6. So, um, Sanviv, you know, you know quite a bit about the two models. So what I might talk about is might talk about the Renault Scenic first, which was the car that sort of really surprised me. And in terms of the tech. So, Sammy, was there anything in particular you're interested to find out about the Renault Scenic? Because we have touched on this model a little bit, but yeah, I might pass to you for just to see if you have any initial questions before I talk about my reflections.
I mean, look, the problem with the Renault is that it can be maybe better than the Chinese EVs, maybe competitive with the Tesla, but the reality is the price they're charging for it is simply not competitive enough. And Renault's dealership network is actually now behind established
Yes.
Chinese companies like BYD and such. So you're basically paying for a brand that is less established, is more expensive. And when people think EVs, they don't really think Renault. But let's face it, the reality is when people think EVs, they think Teslas, and now they think the Chinese brands like BYD.
Mm,
So in this sort of case, if you want to compete with the Chinese brands, you need to be price competitive. So if you're not price competitive, and on top of that, Renault isn't even like a luxury brand like BMW. Like a BMW, Mercedes, Audi, they can charge more for their EVs because at least they've got that brand credibility. Renault is neither here or there. It's not like some premium or luxury, really that kind of premium or luxury brand here. Yet they're charging those kinds of prices for products which might be slightly better than a Chinese EV, but certainly not that much better that it's worth the 10, 15K premium.
yeah. So I think my impressions are like the it probably has the best technology implementation of any sort of car that I sat in the at the motor show. So what that means is it has Android Automotive. So it has that big screen with inbuilt Google Maps, which is, Google Maps is the benchmark for all mapping. And you can download apps and all of that stuff. So that's really cool. I think the key thing is it gets the balance right between physical controls and those digital soft keys or digital or having that large touch screen. So I know we talked about this with the ID3 Neo, but Renault is already there. So you have physical controls for changing the climate, changing all the air conditioning, and then on the steering wheel as well, you have physical controls for so many different things like everything from changing the regen settings. You have paddles that can increase, decrease the regen. Um, you have audio, controls for the audio, and so on. So I think the interior has the best blend of digital and physical controls. And it's also one thing I noticed, and this is something you really only notice when you're sitting in the car, is that the screen is tilted towards the driver as well. So it just makes it easy to reach all of those controls. When I was driving, I think the main positive impression that I got was, again, and this is something, one of the reasons why you'd buy like one of these European cars over like its Chinese rivals, and so on, which is the tuning of the driver assistance system. So I was able to leave, it has all of those systems like speed limit warning, lane departure warning, lane keeping assistance, road sign recognition. Yeah, all of the acronyms are there, and not once. And the loop was around Melbourne CBD and sort of that Port Melbourne, South Melbourne area. So quite a lot of traffic, busy, narrow. Like some of the roads were fairly narrow as well. Wasn't driving particularly fast or anything, but you could tell like they really put some thought into how these systems should be calibrated. Because it didn't annoy me. When I took my eyes off the road to change something on the touchscreen, it didn't start beeping because I wasn't paying attention. So I was very impressed by the calibration of the driver assistance system. So I think that was probably one of the main reasons why you'd buy a Renault over its rivals and why you'd pay maybe a little bit extra compared to a BYD, for example. Okay, I might talk about in comparison, I might talk about the other model that I test drove, which is the MG IM6. So IM stands for, I believe, intelligence in motion. The IM series is sort of MG's like more premium lineup. So it's designed to be sit above the regular MG models and maybe like be a little bit positioned a little bit below Lexus, but designed to take on the semi-premium or premium European brands, still provide value for money. So the IM6 is more their direct competitor to models like the Tesla Model Y, and maybe the BYD Sea Lion, which is the electric model again? Is it the Sea Lion 7?
The
The
Sea Line 7,
Sea
correct.
Lion 7, yes. So, and this is it's interesting to compare the pair, like the Renault and the MG, because we drove on all basically the same route, but MG, like it has, you sit inside it, it has, superficially very nice interior, like soft touch materials everywhere and so on. But it feels like they went to 80% and then they forgot about the remaining 20%, the polishing and the refinement. So they have, like, for example, they have very technology focused. They have the usual two digital display in front of the driver, like a panoramic widescreen display. So one display in front of the in the middle, and then they have a third display, almost like a Porsche Taycan style, which is on the center console, and that controls some of the climate control settings and all of that. But very, very confusing to use. I found it very distracting. Um, Even things like they didn't translate the software properly, so they had RAM-DOM instead of random. So I thought that was funny. They didn't quite put in that effort. And then some of the tuning of the driver assistance systems, as soon as you took your eye off the road, it would start beeping at you, that you're not paying attention. I couldn't actually figure out how to control the air conditioning because I had to look all the way to the bottom and to the left. So, it's very distracting. The maps you wouldn't work until you sign in with your phone and use the app. So that was a little bit disappointing as well. And you couldn't really, the design is there, the quality superficially is there, but the refinement just isn't there. Very powerful car, but uh, very sort of unrefined and not something that, to be honest, in its current state, I would recommend just because of how poorly tuned some of those driver assistance systems are. Sammy, did you have any further questions or comments or anything that you'd like to interrogate me with the MG IM6?
It is a very nice looking car, we'll give it that, especially at night. It looks very distinct. I remember when I saw my first one out on the road near the end of last year, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that does look like a very nice car. Again, the problem is that I don't think MG really markets it that well, and the
Yeah.
price that it's selling at, while competitive, it's still a bit more than what people would be willing to pay for a Chinese EV, especially now with competitors like the Zeekr 7X, which is by far and away, if you're looking for a premium EV, by far and away a better option. So it's sort
Yeah.
of now in a ground where it's not quite good enough to match those cars and not quite cheap enough to match the cheaper Chinese EV.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's interesting to compare, like, look at where the market is, and overall, this Melbourne Motor Show gives a good insight. I think one of the key takeaways, and this comes to another point that I'll make, which is, I last episode I talked about briefly touched on my holiday to Tasmania. And one of the cars I hired, well, not one of the cars, the car that I hired was the Subaru Crosstrek, which is Subaru's small SUV, base specification, naturally aspirated powertrain, but still pretty pricey. I was having a look at the price, and it's 36,490 before on-road costs. So on the road, it'll be close to sort of $40,000 brand new. Anyway, you can get, a lot of these Chinese EVs like the MG4 is in the low to mid 30s. You can get many sort of several BYD models like the Atto 2 high 20s to low 30s as well. There's so many different options now, just broadly speaking, in that 30 to $40,000 segment. And you look at and all of them, you can see like they've made Chinese models. They have a lot of showroom appeal. Like they've made huge strides in the quality of the vehicles over the last sort of 2 to 3 years. And then you look at this Subaru, which was when I was driving it. Yes, I really appreciated the all-wheel drive and the ground clearance because it helped me unintentionally on some of these rough gravel roads. But otherwise, like the value for money just isn't there. Like the engine, for example, 196 newton meters of torque, and I think the power figure is, what is it? It's let me just bring that up. I think it's barely um I think it's 115 kilowatts of power, which is really, really, really poor. Like that's, that's pretty shocking when you're paying that much money. It's very slow. It's not very fuel efficient either. So it's like the worst of both worlds. CVT transmission, which is nothing home to write about. I think and the other thing to note is that you don't even have basic amenities like rear air vents, which is something you would expect as standard when you're paying that much, and especially in the SUV segment, like all of its rivals, Corolla Cross, for example, Honda, they all have all of the Chinese models, they all have rear air vents, and that's really shocking that this car doesn't have such a basic creature comfort. The other thing I would note is that you would expect, like with these Japanese brands, is like for them to have put a little bit more focus in their ADAS tuning, the tuning of the advanced driver assistance systems. However, with the Crosstrek, it had those problems that you would expect from a Chinese model. So the speed limit warning system was very, very oversensitive, used to, um, as soon as you went 1 or 2 kilometers over the limit, it'd start beeping at you. So thankfully, that's something that you can turn off and it stays off. The one thing that you have to turn off every time is the lane departure warning. So that's really, really irritating. As soon as and Sam, I think you had the similar experience a few years ago when you hired, what was it, the Kia Cerato? Oh no, the Hyundai i30 sedan, right?
Yeah, correct. Yes, I had to turn every time before I start off the car. You have to turn off. So, like, to be fair, it's not as bad as from what I understand, Chinese EVs. I think the only thing I had
Yes.
to turn off was the speed limit alert.
Yes.
Otherwise, everything else was fine. But yeah.
Yeah, so look, same thing with the Subaru. As soon as it gets vaguely close to the line, it starts irritating. So it's very annoying, which on the very curvy roads that I was driving on in Tasmania was, quite frustrating. So I had to remember turn that off every time and turn off the speed limit warning. And also the other thing I had to keep turning off was the driver attention monitor. That was the other irritating thing. Every time you used to change a song or try to use Apple CarPlay, it would just start annoying you. So that's really poorly tuned. Other things as well, like the eyesight system, which is what Subaru uses for the adaptive cruise control, and all of the autonomous emergency braking. That's not that's not very reliable either. So bright sunlight, it stops working because it blinds the camera because it relies on like a stereoscopic camera system. So two cameras mounted just behind the top of the windshield. Um, it can't handle fog or heavy rain either. So it was, and this is situations where a combination of a radar, LiDAR, and a camera system would be able to work in some of those really poor weather conditions, but the Subaru just stops working. So that's not very good either. So I think overall, I would only buy the Crosstrek, um, if I really needed the all-wheel drive capability and the high ground clearance, if I was living in like rough terrains or poor roads, and Subarus are very popular in Tasmania for that reason, but otherwise, I would not be buying this car. And I think going to the Melbourne Motor Show just after I came back from my Tassie trip sort of really reinforced that notion that, there's so many more choices in the market, and these Chinese brands are really eating some of these Japanese and Korean brands for breakfast, like much more value for money cars, at the same price. Sam, have any other comments or thoughts on that?
I mean, you're it's interesting because Subaru is now, I suspect, with their absolute latest gen.
Yeah.
Forester and Outback are going to that touchscreen heavy design as well. They're
Yeah.
also following that trend. So we'll be curious to see how the Japanese brands adapt to this new market reality, particularly smaller brands like Mazda and Subaru, who
Yeah.
don't have the brand recognition that bigger brands like Toyota have. Obviously, we're seeing what Mazda are doing, focusing on their already successful model lineups, and then for new markets, partnering with existing brands in such as other Chinese EVs to get products out the door. So for Subaru, it'll be an interesting time. They're obviously for their EVs doing platform sharing with Toyota, which is obviously helping them. And it will be curious to see how, again, as our car market continues to develop and more new challenges, particularly from China, come, how these existing legacy Japanese brands, but that were already a bit smaller, how they cope with this new reality and the
Yeah.
new competition.
Agreed. And I think like there's going to be casualties on from both the Chinese and the non-Chinese brands because we've already seen over the last 24 months brands like Citroen, for example, leave the market. I think a lot of these Chinese brands, the risk is there's so many of them and they're rapidly expanding and they're expanding too quickly to be sustainable. So I think brands like BYD who are probably I think BYD and MG are probably the two most established brands. I feel like they have the best chance of staying in the Australian market, but some of these new brands like GAC, I've lost count of the ones. I've lost count of how many new brands. I think what's the Leap Motor as well.
Yep.
All of these random brands that are coming in. I don't think 5, 10 years down the track we'll see all of them still in the market. So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. Okay, Xander, did you have any further comments, or we might end it
I
there?
mean, yeah, yeah. So it's like I said, I think all the cars that we've talked about today, the Nissan Juke, the Volkswagen, it shows that brands are now trying to be like, okay, what can make us more distinct, to make us more competitive into the future? They're much more now receptive to customer feedback. They're now looking to distinguish themselves beyond just, okay, let's have every EV look exactly the same, because they
Yeah,
realize eventually at some point that there will have to be customers are looking for something different. So it is curious to see. And again, how cars are going to be going in the future is definitely something that's quite exciting.
yeah, agreed. Okay, look, we might end it there for this week's episode of the Hook Turn podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, all of the major podcasting platforms, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.